You signed it over and moved to Florida, Aunt Doris. What my nephew forged and what my son held up at the hall's reopening. The lock was different. That was the first thing my hands knew before my head caught up. A fat brass deadbolt where our old Schleg had been for 31 years, and my key scraping a slot that wouldn't take it. Inside, through the glass, I could see Kenny in his good shirt talking to Reggie Alcott and 2 of the Tuesday League regulars, and when he saw my face at the door, he didn't hurry. He unlocked it slow, like he was doing me a favor, and he said it loud enough for the whole room to hear over the click of the balls. Aunt Doris, come on now. You signed it over. You moved to Florida. Everybody knows that. The felt smelled the same, chalk and beer and lemon oil on the rails, and that smell was the only thing in the room that still belonged to me. Reggie wouldn't look up from his cue. My husband's name was still on the front window in gold leaf, Vukovic's Billiards, and my nephew was standing under it, telling 40 years of regulars that I'd given it all away and run. I let him think the door was closed. He had no idea I'd already opened a different one. Let me take you back, because a lock swapped in the dark is the end of a thing, not the start of it. I was born Doris Krall in 1954 in a rented half of a duplex on Marquette Street in Davenport, Iowa, with a coal chute my father sealed with a coffee can lid and a mother who took in ironing for the Petersons up the hill. We were the kind of poor that keeps the porch swept. I quit Central High at 16 to work the line at the Oscar Mayer plant, then waited tables at the Black Hawk coffee shop, then ran the register at a hardware store on Harrison for 11 years. And the whole time, I was learning a thing that nobody teaches you on purpose. Paper is power, and the people who lose are almost always the people who never read theirs. I met Stjepan Vukovic in 1977 at a wedding in the Croatian Hall on Fillmore. He racked a mean set of 9-ball, and he had forearms like a longshoreman, and he called me Miss Krall for a month after I told him to. Steve, everybody called him Steve, had bought a failing pool hall on Brady Street in 1974 with $9,000 he'd saved welding at the Arsenal and $4,000 his father lent him at no interest and a handshake. 16 tables, Brunswick gold crowns, the real ones, slate beds an inch thick, each one 1,000 pounds you could not move without 4 men and a prayer. When we married in 1979, I took over the books because Steve could run a table but couldn't run a ledger to save his life. And I found in the first month that he'd been undercharging the leagues by 1/3 and paying his beer distributor twice on half the invoices. I fixed it, quietly. That is the seed of everything I am about to tell you, so hold on to it. I am the one who reads the paper. For 31 years, I read every piece of paper that came through that hall. Liquor license renewals, the property tax bills, $6,200 a year by the end, and I contested the assessment twice and won once. The mortgage, which we burned in a coffee can in the parking lot in 1996, with the last of the regulars watching, Steve holding the match like it was a birthday candle. I knew that building the way you know a body you've slept beside for decades, the soft spot in the men's room floor, the north window that fogged, the exact square footage, 7,400 on the main floor and 1,900 up in the loft office, where I kept a green metal filing cabinet that I alone had a key to. Steve and I had one child, Marco, born in 1981. Quiet boy. He could rack and break before he could ride a bike, and he had his father's hands and my patience, which is a dangerous combination if you ever cross the family, though nobody knew that yet, least of all Marco. He went to St. Ambrose, got a degree in accounting, and moved to Chicago to work for an insurance firm, and I was glad. I did not want him breathing chalk dust his whole life, the way we had. My sister Vera, Steve's people and mine got tangled at that Croatian hall, same as we did, married a man named Dwayne and had one son, Kenny, in 1985. And here is where I have to be honest, because a revenge story where you were a saint from the jump is a lie, and I promised you the truth on paper. I loved that boy. God help me, I did. Kenny lost his father at 9. Dwayne went out on the Centennial Bridge one February and didn't come back, and the county ruled it an accident, and Vera never believed it. And none of us pushed. So Kenny grew up half-raised, and Steve and I filled in. Steve taught him to shoot pool at the number 3 table, the one with the fast rails, and Kenny had a real stroke, smooth as pouring water. Summers, he swept the floors for $40 a week, and I overpaid him on purpose. When Vera's liver quit in 2009, she was 51, and I held her hand in the hospice on Kimberly Road, and she said, "Watch out for my Kenny," and I said I would. I meant it all the way to the bone. Steve died on March 3rd, 2011, heart in his sleep beside me, and I didn't know until the alarm went off and his side of the bed was cold. He was 62. We had been married 32 years. I want to tell you about the cue because you need to understand it before you understand the rest. Steve shot with a Joss 2-piece he'd bought in 1981, a plain house-brown cue with a linen wrap gone black at the grip from 30 years of his hand, an ivory-colored ferrule he'd replaced twice, and a little brass ring above the joint that he'd nicked with a screwdriver so he'd always know it in a rack of 40. It was not worth money, maybe $200 to a stranger. It was worth my whole life to me. After the funeral, I wrapped it in a chamois and stood it in the corner of the loft office behind the filing cabinet. And some nights when the hall was empty and the ice machine was ticking downstairs, I'd take it out and just hold it, feel where his grip had worn the wrap soft, and I wouldn't shoot with it. I'd just hold it, and that was as close to church as I got in those years. Now, here is the thing the whole story turns on, and I am going to tell it to you plain, the way I wish somebody had told the regulars before they believed my nephew. When Steve bought that building in 1974, it was in his name alone. But in the spring of 1999, after his first small heart scare, we sat down with a lawyer named Harlan Brody, Old Brody, the father, at his office on 3rd Street, and we did our estate planning like sensible people. And Steve, who loved me and who trusted my reading of paper more than his own, deeded the building. Not to a trust with his name first, not to the two of us as some tangle a clever nephew could argue about later. He deeded it to me, Doris M. Vukovich, sole owner, fee simple. Recorded at the Scott County Recorder's Office, Book 4471, page 218, stamped and filed on May 12, 1999. $19 in recording fees, and I have the certified copy, and I know the book and page by heart, the way some women know their children's birthdays. I owned that hall. Outright. Every square foot, every slate bed, the gold leaf on the window, all of it, mine and only mine, on file in a government office where it had sat quietly for 12 years by the time Steve died, and for 22 years by the day Kenny changed my lock. He did not know that. He thought the building had been Steve's, and that when Steve died, it floated around in some vague family cloud, up for grabs by whoever had the nerve to grab it. That was his whole mistake, and it was a beauty, because it was invisible to him. He built his entire theft on a fact that had not been true since before he could drive. But I am getting ahead. Let me show you how he got there, because it did not happen all at once. Rot never does. After Steve died, I ran the hall alone, and it was hard, and it was good. I was 57. I kept 16 tables lit, ran 3 leagues a week, sold beer and pop and the frozen pizzas the health department let me get away with, and I cleared, in a good year, maybe $38,000 after everything, which is not a fortune, but it was mine, and it was honest. Kenny came around more after his mother passed. I was glad of it. He was 26 then, a little soft in the middle, a little too fond of scratch tickets and the OTB across the river, but he could still run a table like his uncle taught him, and he called me Aunt Doris and kissed my cheek, and I let myself need him. The first wrong note was small, Christmas 2013. I gave him a key to the front door because he'd offered to open on Sundays so I could sleep past 6 for once in my life. Reasonable. Kind, even. Except I noticed by February the Sunday till was light. Not a lot, $20 here, $35 there, and the beer count didn't match the cooler. And when I mentioned it, gentle, Kenny got a look I'd never seen on him, a flat, blank look, like a shade pulled down. And he said, "You calling me a thief, Aunt Doris?" And I said, "No, of course not." And I let it go. I did not let it go. I wrote it down. I have a spiral notebook, the $1.29 kind from Walgreens, and I started a page that night. February 9th, 2014. Sunday till short $35. I filed it away. That is the thing about me people never learn until it's too late. I never actually let anything go. I just set it down where I can find it later. Second note, 2015. Kenny started bringing a man named Chase Dornbush around, a guy in a leather blazer who did real estate, and the two of them would sit at the bar doing math on napkins and going quiet when I came near. Chase asked me once, all teeth, what I thought a footprint like this on Brady would trade for. And I said it wasn't for sale, and he laughed like I'd told a joke. I wrote his name down too. Chase Dornbush, real estate. Asking price of Hall. I didn't know what it meant yet. I knew it meant something. Third note, and this one still puts a stone in my chest. Fall of 2017. I took a tumble on the loft stairs, cracked 2 ribs, and I was laid up 6 weeks. Kenny ran the hall, and he ran it fine, I'll give him that. But when I came back, the green filing cabinet in the loft had a scratch around the lock. Fresh, bright metal. And the drawer with the property records was not the way I leave a drawer. I leave the tax folder in front of the insurance folder. It was backwards. He'd been in there. He hadn't found what he was looking for because the certified deed wasn't in that cabinet. It was in a safe deposit box at Quad City Bank on Kimberly, box 1140, $55 a year, along with Steve's watch and our marriage certificate and $3,000 in old savings bonds. But Kenny didn't know that. He thought he'd searched the house. He thought the fact that he found nothing meant there was nothing to find. I want you to sit with how patient I had to be. I knew by the fall of 2017 that my sister's son was casing my building. I knew he had a man in a leather blazer pricing it. I knew he'd jimmied my cabinet while I lay on the couch with taped ribs. And I said nothing, because knowing is a card, and you do not show a card. You wait until the hand is worth the whole pot. Steve's cue was still behind that cabinet through all of it. Kenny had stood 18 inches from it in the dark with a flashlight and never touched it. I found a long, chalk blue smudge on the chamois wrap when I checked, where his light or his sleeve had brushed it, and I cleaned it off with my thumb and stood there in the loft a long time. That was the night I stopped thinking of him as Vera's boy and started thinking of him as a problem I would eventually have to solve. It cost me something to make that turn. I loved him. But I read the paper, and the paper said he was going to try to take everything Steve and I built, and the only question left was when. It was the spring of 2023. By then I was 69 and slower on the stairs, and I'd started talking, out loud and in front of Kenny, about how tired I was, how a woman my age maybe ought to be somewhere warm. It was half true and half bait, and I am not proud of the bait, but I'm not sorry either. My friend Alma Reyes had a condo in Bradenton, Florida, and I'd flown down twice, and I let Kenny hear me say how nice it was, how quiet, how you could sit by the water and not feel your knees. I wanted to know what he'd do with the idea. He did exactly what I was afraid he'd do. He picked it up and ran with it and turned it into a weapon. Here is what he did, and I only assembled the full shape of it later from the county records and the handwriting man and Kenny's own bank trail. On April 4th, 2023, a quitclaim deed was filed at the Scott County Recorder purporting to transfer Vukovic's Billiards, the building, the land, the whole 7,400 square feet, from Doris M. Vukovic to Kenny R. Sitko for the sum of $1 and other good and valuable consideration. My signature was on it, notarized, stamped, filed. Book 6803, page 44. I never signed it. I have never in my life signed a thing I didn't read, and I would sooner have signed away my own hands than that building. The signature was a forgery. A decent one, traced most likely off the liquor license renewal I'd signed at the bar where he could photograph it. The notary was a woman named Tammy, who worked at the check-cashing place Kenny frequented, and she'd stamped it without me in the room, which is a crime she did not fully understand she was committing, for the price of a favor and, I later learned, $300. And the reason it worked? The reason it worked for 8 whole months is the ugliest part, and it's the part where the system lined up behind him like I told you it would. Because a filed deed looks real. The county recorder does not check whether you actually signed. They record what you bring them if the stamps are in order. Once it's in the book, it is presumptively valid, and the burden falls on the person it robbed to prove the negative. So Kenny walked into Quad City Bank with that recorded deed and refinanced the building I owned, free and clear, and pulled $180,000 in cash out of my life's work, and used a chunk of it to change my locks and paint the loft and put a neon Coors sign in my front window where Steve and I never allowed one. And he told everyone, the regulars, the beer distributor, the league captains, my own hairdresser, that I had signed it all over to him, fair and square, and moved to Florida to be near the water. That's the story that was going around Davenport by that summer. Poor Kenny, taking care of the family business now that his old aunt's given up and gone south. What a good boy. Watch out for my Kenny. I found out the way you find out these things, small and sideways. I'd been in Bradenton 6 weeks helping Alma after her hip surgery, entirely above board, and I called Reggie Alcott to ask him to check my mail. And Reggie went quiet on the phone, that same quiet Kenny used to go. And then he said, "Doris, we all figured, with you selling to Kenny and all." And the floor of the world tilted about 4 degrees and never fully came back level. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because everybody expects the old lady to cry, and Kenny was counting on it. I stood in Alma's kitchen in Bradenton with the ceiling fan ticking and a load of Alma's towels going thump-thump in the dryer down the hall, and I felt the anger arrive, and it did not arrive hot. It arrived cold and clean and organized, like a filing cabinet opening. There was a click somewhere behind my sternum. I have felt it maybe 3 times in my life, and every time it meant the same thing. The deciding was over, and the doing had begun. I made one phone call that afternoon. Not to the police, not yet. You don't hand a coward a warning shot. I called Brody. Not old Harlan, who'd passed in 2016, but his son, Brody the Younger, Nathan Brody, who'd taken over the practice on 3rd Street and who'd known me since he was a kid doing homework in his father's waiting room. I said, "Nathan, it's Doris Vukovic. My nephew has recorded a deed with my name forged on it, and I need you to pull book 6803, page 44, and then I need you to pull book 4471, page 218, and I need you to tell me which one the state of Iowa believes." There was a pause while he wrote it down. Then Nathan Brody said, slow, "Doris, if 4471 says what you say it says, this isn't a fight. This is a formality with a criminal charge attached." And for the first time in 6 weeks, I sat down. Here is where I have to tell you what I did not do, because the restraint is the whole point. I did not call Kenny and scream. I did not drive back to Davenport and make a scene at the door of my own hall. I did not tell Reggie or the leagues the truth. Not yet. Because a truth spent early is a truth wasted, and I wanted every one of them in that room when it came out. I did the patient thing. I read the paper, and I gathered more of it. Over the next 4 months, Nathan Brody and I built the quietest, most complete little box you ever saw. First, the recorded deed to me, book 4471, page 218, May 12th, 1999. Certified copy, freshly obtained, sole ownership, fee simple, recorded 24 years before Kenny's forgery. Under Iowa's recording law, my deed was first, valid, and public. Kenny couldn't have transferred the building to himself on my forged signature because I'd already owned it outright for a generation. There was nothing of mine for a fake $1 deed to even pretend to move. His deed wasn't a competing claim. It was a fraud sitting on top of a fact, and the fact had been in the county book since before he had a learner's permit. Second, the forgery itself. I hired a forensic document examiner out of Cedar Rapids, a woman named Priya Ganguly, $2,400, and she compared the signature on book 6803 against 19 genuine signatures of mine, liquor licenses, the mortgage burn photo where I'd signed the release, checks. Her report ran 14 pages and concluded, in the flat language those people use, that the questioned signature was a simulated forgery, traced, with pen lifts and tremor in all the wrong places, consistent with copying and inconsistent with genuine writing. She found the source, too. The pressure pattern matched my 2022 liquor renewal almost line for line. Third, the money. Nathan subpoenaed the bank once we filed. Kenny had pulled $180,000 against my building, and by the time we looked, had already burned through $71,000 of it. $22,000 to Chase Dornbush for reasons that turned out to be a bad land deal in Muscatine, $14,000 across the river at the OTB and the casino, the locks, the paint, the neon, and a used Silverado. He'd been telling everyone he owned a haul he was actively strip mining. Fourth, and this is the one that still makes me proud, the notary. Tammy from the check cashing place. Nathan didn't threaten her. He just called her and read her the statute on notarial fraud and the number of the box she'd checked, swearing I appeared before her. And Tammy folded like a lawn chair and gave a sworn statement that she never saw me, that Kenny brought the paper already signed, that he paid her $300, and that she'd been sick over it for months. She was the conscience of the whole rotten business, the one soul in it who couldn't keep her own paper straight because it was eating her. I don't hate Tammy. She's the reason it was airtight. And through all of it, I kept my son out. That was deliberate, too. Marco had been calling from Chicago. He'd heard the move to Florida story from a cousin and known instantly it was garbage, because Marco knows I would no more abandon that haul than saw off my own leg. He wanted to fly down and throttle Kenny. I told him no. I told him to sit tight and to trust me, and that when the time came, I'd want him there, not to fight, but to stand. He didn't fully understand what I meant. He would. I let Kenny have his winter. I let him plan his big, grand reopening, because that was his final piece of theater, you see. He'd decided that to bury the old regime for good, he'd throw a party. Fresh paint, the Coors neon, a DJ, a new banner over the door, Kenny's Billiards and Sports Bar, and he mailed flyers and posted it around and picked a Saturday in early February 2024. He wanted the whole town to see the hall was his. He sent me a flyer, actually, mailed it to Alma's in Bradenton, with a post-it that said, "See? No hard feelings. Come visit sometime." That may have been the single stupidest thing my nephew ever did, and he did a great many stupid things, because it told me the date, the time, and the size of the crowd he'd be humiliated in front of. I flew into the Quad City Airport on February 8th. Nathan Brody had everything ready, and I called Marco in Chicago, and I said one sentence. "Saturday, 7 o'clock, wear the gray suit, and let me hand you what to say." He said, "Yes, ma'am," and I heard in his voice that he finally understood, and my throat closed up a little, because a mother waits her whole life to hear her boy sound like that. The reopening was February 10th, 2024, 7 o'clock. Maybe 60 people packed into Vukovic's. Into Kenny's, the banner said. And the DJ had it too loud, and the new paint smelled like a hangover. And the felt still smelled like chalk and lemon oil underneath it all, because you cannot repaint a smell. The regulars were there, awkward in the new light. Reggie Alcott stood by the number 3 table, not shooting. Chase Dornbush was there in a different leather blazer. And Kenny, in a purple shirt with the collar open, worked the room like a man who'd earned something. And at 7:15, he tapped a beer bottle with a ring and got up on a chair to make his speech. I came in the front door while he was on the chair. I'd swapped nothing, broken nothing, cut no lock. I'd simply had Nathan send a certified letter to the bank 10 days prior, so the deadbolt situation was already, quietly, no longer Kenny's to control. But he didn't know that yet. The room saw me and went the specific kind of quiet a loud room goes when the dead walk in. Kenny looked down from his chair and his face did something complicated. "Aunt Doris," he said, and recovered and smiled for the crowd. "Everybody, my Aunt Doris, come to see the new place. I thought you were in Florida." A little laugh went around because he'd primed them for months. "You signed it over, remember? You moved to Florida." He said it the way you'd remind a confused old woman of her own address, and I saw 2 or 3 people give me the pity look, and Reggie stared at the floor. I did not say a word. This is the part I need you to hear right. I had every document in a leather folder under my arm, the 1999 deed, Priya's 14 pages, Tammy's affidavit, the bank subpoena, all of it. And I could have opened my mouth and buried him myself in 90 seconds flat. I didn't. I turned to the door and I nodded, and my son came in. Marco was in the gray suit. He's 43 now, big through the shoulders like his father, and he crossed that room slow with a manila envelope in his hand. And he stopped at the foot of Kenny's chair, and he did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. He waited until the DJ, God bless him, killed the music on his own, and the whole hall could hear a pin drop on slate. "Get down off the chair, Kenny," Marco said. "You're standing on my mother's floor." Kenny laughed, but it came out wrong. "Marco, buddy, come on, this is a party." Book 4471, page 218. Marco said the numbers like nails going in. He pulled the certified deed from the envelope and held it up over his head, turning so the room could see the county stamp, the old blue ink. Scott County Recorder, May 12th, 1999. This building, this land, every table in it, deeded to Doris M. Vukovic, sole owner, and recorded 24 years before you were born as a thief. He let that sit. My mother has owned this hall, outright, free and clear, since before I could legally drink. There was never anything for her to sign over. There was never anything for you to buy for $1. You didn't inherit a hall, Kenny. You forged a piece of paper on top of one that already had her name on it, and you've been robbing a building you never owned for a single day of your life. The color went out of Kenny's face in a way I have only otherwise seen on a man having a stroke. It started at his hairline and dropped like a shade. That's not... He got down off the chair after all. "She sold it to me. I have the deed." Marco took out the second document. "This one?" He held up a copy of book 6803, page 44. Simulated. Traced. He held up Priya Ganguly's report next to it. 14 pages, the question signature, and my real one, blown up huge on the cover so 60 people could see for themselves how the fake one shook. 14-page forensic finding. Traced off her 2022 liquor license. Then the affidavit. Tammy Voss, notary. Sworn statement that she never witnessed my mother sign anything, that you handed her a deed already forged, and that you paid her $300. Then the last page. And the bank record. $180,000 you pulled against a building that was never yours. $71,000 of it already gone. The OTB, the casino, $22,000 to that man right there. Marco didn't even point. Chase Dornbush was already moving toward the door, and two people stepped in front of it. Not roughly, just enough. Kenny looked around the room for a friendly face, and there wasn't one. Reggie Alcott had finally lifted his head, and what was on it wasn't pity anymore. It was the slow, sick understanding of a man who'd believed a lie about a woman he'd known for 40 years. "Doris," Reggie said, and his voice cracked, "I'm so sorry." "We didn't." "I know you didn't," I told him. And that was the only thing I said in the whole room. And I said it gentle, because Reggie was one of mine and always had been. Kenny started to beg. I'd known he would. Cowards under a mask of power always do, the second the mask comes off. Aunt Doris, it was Chase. It was his idea. I was going to pay it back. I swear to God, I was going to put it all back. My mom, think about my mom. She'd want—" "Don't." Marco said it quietly, and it stopped Kenny like a hand on the chest. "Don't you say her name. You watch out for your own self now, because nobody in this family's doing it for you anymore." He turned to the room. "The hall's closed tonight. It'll reopen when my mother says it does, under the name that's on the window, the real one." He gestured up at the front glass, where under Kenny's stupid vinyl banner you could still see the gold leaf, Vukovic's Billiards. Two Davenport officers were waiting outside. Nathan had timed that too. They didn't cuff Kenny in front of everyone. Iowa lets a fraud case breathe a little. But they walked him out and Chase Dornbush with him, and the last I saw of my nephew that night was the back of a purple shirt going out the door under my husband's name. He was charged in March 2024, forgery in the second degree, notarial fraud, and theft in the first degree, over the $180,000. He took a plea in the fall. The Silverado went back. What was left of the money came back through the bank once the fraudulent refinance was voided, which happened almost automatically the moment a judge laid Book 4471 next to Book 6803, because the law, once you make it look, does not have any trouble at all telling a 24-year-old recorded deed from a traced signature a notary swears she never watched anyone write. The system that lined up behind him for 8 months turned around in about 8 minutes once it was looking at the paper. But that's the machinery. And machinery isn't why I told you all this. I told you because of what happened after the room emptied. It was near midnight. The DJ was gone. The 60 people were gone. Chase and Kenny were gone. And it was just Marco and Nathan Brody and Reggie, who wouldn't leave, and me. Somebody had torn the Coors Neon's cord out of the wall. The new paint still stank. And I went up the loft stairs, slower than I used to, 69, 2 ribs that never sat right, to the corner behind the green filing cabinet. And the cabinet Kenny had scratched was still there. And behind it, still wrapped in its chamois, untouched through all of it, was Steve's cue. Kenny had refinanced the building and painted the loft and gone through my drawers a second time. And he had never once thought to look behind the cabinet, because he was a man who only ever wanted the things that were worth money. And the cue was worth $200 to a stranger, and my whole life to me. And that difference was the exact difference between him and me, and it was why he lost. I brought it downstairs. Marco saw it, and his eyes went bright, because he knew that cue. He'd learned to break with a smaller one right beside his father at the number 3 table. Reggie racked. He didn't ask, he just did it, tight and clean, the way you rack for someone who's owed a break. I took the little cube of blue chalk off the rail, the good master's chalk, same as Steve always used, and I chalked the worn black tip of my husband's cue, slow, listening to that soft crumbling sound it makes, the most familiar sound in my life. "You want me to break it, Ma?" Marco asked, gentle. "No, honey," I said. "This one's mine." I set my bridge hand on the felt Steve and I bought in 1996, on the slate we'd sworn at 4 men to move, under the gold leaf name that had never for one single day, stopped being true. In the first rack of the hall that was mine, that had always, on paper, in the county book, in the plain, unshakable fact of it, been only ever mine. I chalked once more for luck. Then I dropped my shoulder the way Steve taught me at that same table 40 years ago, and I broke.